Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to use the paint bucket tool and the gradient tool. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to apply all my images again, so I'm just going to switch on the visibility of these. I just had them temporarily turned off. This is like a montage of images, but it's on a plain white background. So what if I want to change the colour of that white background? Well, I can use either the paint bucket tool or I can use the gradient tool, and they're both nested together, so if you see one or the other you can just right mouse click and then pick up paint bucket or gradient. So let's start with the paint bucket. The paint bucket will apply a solid colour to your background, and the colour it applies will be based on whatever the foreground colour is set in this box here. So if I click on this box, it will bring up the colour picker dialog box. You then go over here, for example, and choose purples, and then you can move around and choose the shade of purple that you like. So if I choose that one and click OK, my foreground colour swatch changes to the purple that I selected. The only thing that I need to do now is just make sure that I'm working on the correct layer in my layers panel window, so make sure that the background layer is the active layer, and then I just click anywhere with a paint bucket and it will apply that purple colour that I had pre-selected. So that's applying a solid colour using the paint bucket tool. If I right mouse click and pick up the gradient tool, we now got different options here for the gradient tool, and this here allows us to choose the kind of gradient that we want to apply, the colours that we want. So if I click down here, the first square is normally always a gradient of whatever your foreground and background colour is. So in this case it's the purple that we selected and the white. So you can pre-select two colours here, and then you'll always get a mix of those two colours in this first square. Well, we'll just have a look at how the gradient tool works. Well, I'm just going to pick up this colour here, for example, so I'm going to go for this one actually, the orange and the sort of the blue colour that we got there. So if I just click and drag across, it then applies that gradient. Now it's very important that you make sure you work on the correct layer, because if you're working on one of the image layers and then applied your gradient, it actually replaces the image that was on that layer, and it also hides these two images because this is now filled with a solid colour of gradients. So Control-Alt-Z to undo that, and just make sure you have the correct layer active before you apply the gradient. Okay, I'm just going to switch off the visibility of these images so you can just see the background layer and look at how the gradient tool works. So the way it works is you have the colour swatch selected, you then click and drag. Now if you do a long click and drag down, what you do is you get a nice blend between the colours, and if you click and drag in the opposite direction, the colours are reversed. Now if you do a short click and drag, then you get a much sharper boundary between the two colours. So a real short click and drag, you get a real sharp boundary. Long click and drag and you get a nice blend. And you can click and drag in any direction, so you can go across the page and you'll get your gradient going across. You can go diagonally across the page and you can have a diagonal gradient. So just depending on how you drag depends on the kind of gradient that you're going to end up with. That's creating a linear gradient at the moment. You can also create a radial gradient, so if I do a short click and drag you end up with that kind of effect. Long click and drag you end up with a much more radial effect. We've got here an angle gradient as well, so you can end up with that effect. Here we've got a reflected gradient, so you can end up with this sort of reflection effect going on here, the orange at the top and the orange at the bottom, and then we've got like a diamond gradient as well that goes on. And if you wanted to reverse those colours, you've got a little reverse tick box here as well. In terms of choosing more gradient swatches, so we've got a limited selection here. We can also go to this little options bar that we've got here, and we have a set of pre-made gradients down the bottom here. So if I load in colour harmonies and always choose a pen means add them to your existing list, you'll see that I've now got more gradients added in. I can go in and add colour harmonies to a pen, and it adds more gradients. I can go in and add in metals and a pen, and it adds more gradients. You get the idea that you can go in and add in as many colours as you like, or many gradients as you like that are pre-made and available. Just pick up those gradients then and just click and drag across your piece of paper and you've applied that gradient. I'm going to go back to a linear style here and apply them across there like that. Switching back on my images, you can see the effect that it has. Creates a really nice kind of background effect that you've got there. You can also come in, for example, and just choose your first square that you've got here, your first gradient color, and then if you double click on this bar, so this option here, if you double click, you bring up the gradient editor, and that now allows you to create your own kind of custom gradient. So if you click on the paint pot here, you can change things like the opacity of it. You click on the pot at the bottom and you can change the color, so you can choose a different color. So actually I'm going to go from green to white. You can add more paint pots in, so I could just click here and add another paint pot, and I could go in and change the color and choose a blue and click OK, and now it's going green, blue. Click here and add another paint pot in and change the color. and let's go for a yellow. And you can see I've got my own kind of custom color. I can move them along. I can change where the split is going to be between the green and the blue by moving this little cursor here. You can delete paint pots just by selecting one and pressing the delete key on your keyboard, so you can create your own kind of custom color. You can even save it so it will always appear as a color swatch available in your presets for your gradient. So I'm just going to go on and add another paint pot and say, okay, yeah, that'll do me as my custom color. And I'm going to click OK. Got my own preset gradient up there now. Click and drag it, and there you can see I've got my own custom gradient that I've made. So that's just a little bit about the gradient tool and about using the paint bucket tool.